Welcome to the Snoring Historian, where the stories are true, the jokes are dry, and if you make it to the end, you either have insomnia or you're just really into 15th century French war politics. Go ahead and get comfortable. Lie back, take a breath, and prepare to drift off to the soothing sounds of medieval martyrdom. While you're still awake enough to understand human language, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the little bell so you don't miss any future tales of history's most overachieving insomniacs. Tonight's story, Joan of Arc, a teenage girl who heard voices, led armies, and made the King of France look like he was being babysat by a shepherd in armor. If you've ever felt like a fraud at your job, just remember, she did hers better than most generals before she hit puberty. Joan of Arc was born in 1412 in Domremy, a small village in northeastern France that was mostly known for being not burned down. Yet, the 100 Years' War was still grinding on, and things were going so badly for France that people were starting to wonder if God had just switched teams. Joan was a peasant girl. She couldn't read, couldn't write, and had absolutely zero formal military training. But she had three things going for her: a deep religious faith, an unshakable sense of purpose, and what she claimed were divine voices telling her to save France. At age 13, she said she began hearing voices from saints: Michael the Archangel, Catherine of Alexandria, and Margaret of Antioch. You know, your standard celestial trio. According to Joan, they didn't just tell her to pray more or stop swearing. They told her to lead an army and put the rightful king on the throne. Now, in modern times, this would get you a very different sort of attention. But in 15th century France, this actually made her more credible. After all, the nobility had been screwing things up for a century. Maybe it was time to let the teenager give it a shot. Joan made her way to the town of Vaucouleurs, where she pestered a local garrison commander so persistently that he finally sent her to the Dauphin, Charles VII, the man who claimed to be the rightful king of France, but hadn't been crowned yet. Why? Because the English held the traditional coronation city, Reims. Classic war logistics. Charles wasn't immediately sold. He had Joan tested by church scholars to make sure she wasn't a heretic, a lunatic, or a particularly eloquent con artist. To everyone's surprise, she passed. She was given armor, a banner, and command of troops. That last one caused some grumbling from the actual military men. But Joan wasn't interested in their opinions. She believed God was her commanding officer. Also worth noting, she wore men's armor, cut her hair short, and carried herself like someone who had no time for 15th century gender norms. Her clothes would later become part of the justification for her execution, because nothing says dangerous heretic like pants. In 1429, Joan joined the French forces at the Siege of Orléans. The English had surrounded the city for months, and things were looking bleak. Enter Joan, 17 years old, armored, banner in hand, and very confident that God had booked her for a victory tour. She didn't lead from behind. She rode into battle, was wounded by an arrow, came back anyway, and helped rally the troops. Within days, the siege was broken. French morale skyrocketed. It was as if France had been driving a broken-down cart for decades, and Joan was the spark that got the ox to move again. After Orléans, her legend grew faster than a medieval rumor in a monastery. One of the more underappreciated parts of Joan's rise was her sense of strategy. Contrary to popular belief, she wasn't just a symbol. She was involved in planning and decision-making. While her commanders didn't always follow her advice, she earned their respect by showing up in full armor and marching headfirst into danger. Not to mention, it's hard to argue with a teenager who keeps winning. She was also fiercely protective of civilians and refused to let her troops loot or behave like the English, which at the time was code for murdery and drunk. Her high moral standards didn't always win her friends among the mercenaries, but it made her a favorite of the common people. After a few more victories, Joan marched with Charles VII to Reims, cutting through enemy territory like someone who hadn't read the risk assessments. On July 17, 1429, Charles was finally crowned king, with Joan by his side. This was the high point. She had done it. God said crown the king, and the king was crowned. You'd think this would earn her a nice retirement plan, and maybe a goat farm somewhere. But no. Instead, Charles started sidelining her. Turns out, once you're king, the peasant girl who made it all happen starts to seem politically inconvenient. Joan wasn't ready to stop. Against advice, she kept fighting, even after Reims, even after Charles stopped returning her letters. She tried to recapture Paris and was injured in the attempt. She continued leading troops in small campaigns, refusing to fade politely into history. In 1430, she was captured during a skirmish near Compiègne by the Burgundians, French allies of the English. Charles VII, in a show of gratitude so faint it may have been sarcasm, did absolutely nothing to ransom her. The English were thrilled. Here was the perfect scapegoat, a peasant girl claiming divine visions who had humiliated their armies. They paid the Burgundians for her, then put her on trial for heresy. It was less of a trial and more of a slow-motion execution with paperwork. The charges were numerous: heresy, witchcraft, cross-dressing. Not even kidding. Joan defended herself brilliantly. She debated trained theologians with the kind of clarity that made them visibly uncomfortable. At one point, they asked if she believed she was in God's grace. She replied, "If I am not, may God put me there, and if I am, may God so keep me." This answer, as one scholar later noted, was theologically airtight. But airtight theology does not stop a politically motivated execution. At one point during her trial, she was tricked into signing a confession she couldn't read. And when she was found wearing men's clothing again, because, according to her, it was safer in a male prison, they used that as an excuse to resume the sentence. In May 1431, at the age of 19, Joan was burned at the stake in Rouen. Her last word was reportedly, "Jesus." The English thought they'd made an example of her. Instead, they made a martyr. 25 years later, the church re-examined her case and declared her innocent. Oops. Turns out, burning an innocent teenager might not be the best PR move for your holy war. They interviewed over 100 witnesses, soldiers, townspeople, even her former enemies. What emerged wasn't just a portrait of a brave girl, but of a brilliant, stubborn, devout leader who had rattled the foundations of two kingdoms. In 1920, Joan of Arc was canonized as a saint. That's right, the same church that torched her came back around with a halo and an apology letter. Today, she's the patron saint of France, soldiers, and people who get way too much done before age 20. That concludes tonight's tale. If you're still awake, congratulations. You've just survived the 100 Years' War in under an hour. Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and share this with anyone who could use a bedtime story involving divine visions, battlefield injuries, and church-sanctioned arson. Until next time, this has been the Snoring Historian. Sleep well, and dream rebelliously.